Okay, as Susan said, the task force happened in October 1991. I was invited to join that by Peter Gresham, who actually rang me out of the blue. I was the only person from the industry, superannuation industry, on the group. There were 4 private sector people, 4 public sector, and plus a secretariat led by Angela Ryan. I was the only member with direct industry experience. As Susan has said, the mother of all budgets have provoked an enormous outcry. You might not be able to read the words on that, but the top left for pensioners, then there were students, beneficiaries, the sick, the people on welfare, and all, according to the cartoonist, in favour of the international rating agencies, which is what seemed to concern Ruth more than anything at the time. From the point of view of pensioners specifically, there were the people in the front who'd saved, and here was the surcharge coming along to get them. So the task force didn't know how it wanted to run its affairs, but it decided, I think rightly, to sit down and write out what all the issues were. And we produced a report in October 1991, which is called The Issues, and which simply set out, without passing judgment on any of them, all of the things that we needed to think about. There was a lot of political heat out there, and we took the issues on the road. We had 14 community meetings around the country. The first thing that we had to do was to hose down the pensioners, because they were in white heat. They really did not like what had happened to them in the last 12 months. So that was our first task. And after informing everybody about the issues, we then formulated 3 main options, which we put out in the mother of all reports, which was the options. And we designed what we thought was the best voluntary scheme, the best tax-based savings scheme, and the best compulsory scheme. And again, we took that to the country. We had 14 community presentations around the country, plus 8 or so to specific groups, also a bunch of op-eds and presentations. Only after all that did the task force discuss what our final recommendations might look like. But we discovered that the Joint Cabinet Caucus Committee, which was supposedly looking at public provision, this was of the politicians themselves, hadn't actually done anything. While we were busy looking at private provision, which is our name, the task force on private provision for retirement, the Joint Cabinet Backbench Committee hadn't done anything about national superannuation. So our mandate was extended to public provision. The final report was issued in December 1992. It recommended what we call the improved voluntary regime. We pointed out at the time that this was probably the hardest of the 3 options to make work, because we weren't bribing or forcing people to do anything in particular. So following that, we disbanded the task force ourselves. Just as a trivial observation, that for those of you who know about colours, that was called Vico Green at the time. So then it all went quiet. And for those who can't see the words, when I see sites like this, Ruth, I think maybe we can arrange something sensible on superannuation. But behind the scenes, the task force's chairman, Jeff Todd, was crafting a political agreement. He was knocking some heads together, convincing them that superannuation was an unwinnable political issue. And then the unthinkable happened. For 3 of the 4 main political parties signed the accord. If they were honest, they probably weren't too happy about it. And there was a memorable photograph that appeared at the time. Jim Anderton was holding his nose, and Michael Moore was looking across the table. So it looked as though they'd been forced together, and guess who didn't come to dinner? New Zealand First. The old spoiler. Winston Peters thought it was a stitch-up. He wasn't interested in joining what he called a cosy little conspiracy. However, he did acknowledge the benefits of consensus when he announced that a New Zealand First government, note the words, would reach a consensus on retirement through consultation with the elderly rather than producing some in-house agreement. This was a typical Winston piece of Orwellian doublespeak. As if the task force had not consulted with the elderly and everybody else who mattered, and as if consensus would follow consultation by just NZF with just the elderly. The threat then materialised. The coalition agreement that followed our first MMP election was then followed by 6 weeks of negotiations. You remember the absolute agony of that process. The removal of the surcharge was one of the provisions of that agreement. That probably wasn't too difficult for National to swallow, but a referendum on compulsory private provision was a real dead rat. And I was told at the time by a senior National Party minister who was part of the negotiating team that had the National not agreed to the referendum, there would not have been a coalition agreement. So the referendum coincided with the first post-accord review led by Jeff Todd, and Susan was involved in that first periodic review group. The interim PRG report was issued in July to inform the debate on compulsion, but the referendum's result was absolutely outstanding. 92% against, 8% in favour. It was said at the time that the Winston factor might have contributed. It probably did, but the best evidence I saw was that it contributed only 11 basis points to that result. So in all of that, I've naturally had some reflections. First of all, I went into the task force thinking I knew everything about superannuation. In fact, I knew nothing or very little. I thought that tax breaks for retirement saving were a good idea. Why wouldn't the government encourage people to do things sensibly? I thought that compulsion was a good idea because forcing people to save then allowed the government to adopt the Australian model and reduce the commitment on New Zealand superannuation. I thought there was a crisis with the ageing population, and there wasn't. I now understand that governments, in fact, can do very little to either persuade or force people to save if they don't want to. And if they do force them to behave in a particular way, governments have absolutely no control over what individuals do with the rest of their financial lives. Some things went well. The three-stage approach I thought was outstanding. We kind of fell into that by accident, but it worked well. Stating the issues, offering the options, and then producing the final report after everybody could see what we were up to. No one else has ever done that, and that still had ever done that at the time, and I think that's still the case today. The community engagement was good. We made sure that everybody knew everything that we knew. We issued newsletters, we had community meetings all around the country. It was a huge time commitment, and were it not for the fact that I was working for a very sympathetic employer at the time, Fletcher Challenge, that would not have been possible. I effectively did 2 jobs for 15 months. Jeff Todd was an outstanding appointment. He knew nothing about superannuation, but he was a superb chairman. And the fact that he was able to knock the political heads together under the radar post the final report is evidence of that. The other outstanding appointment was Angela Ryan, as she then was, now Angela McRae, who's now a productivity commissioner in Australia. She was absolutely outstanding. She was from a Treasury background, but she was, without her, it wouldn't have happened. The diverse makeup of the task force was also a good thing. The fact that they didn't know anything about superannuation probably on balance was a good thing. The fact that we took an evidence-based approach. We used what was available. I don't know whether any of you remember what we called the wavy blue line, because nobody had sat down to figure out whether or not we actually had a crisis ahead of us. In fact, once we had the report written, we were spending, the government was spending 36% of GDP at the time. It was due to go down to 32%, most principally because of the increase in the state pension age, but then up to 38% of GDP after 60 years. None of that looked like a crisis, and I think that was the one crucial bit of evidence which allowed the task force to recommend the improved voluntary option. We made some mistakes. Disbanding on releasing the final report was a mistake, because that left a bit of a vacuum which people were able to climb into. That vacuum was kind of restored or eliminated with the publication of the Accord. The other mistake I think we made was that we agreed with the Treasury officials, or the officials on the task force, that the Retirement Commissioner should report to the Minister, in other words, effectively be part of MSD. I was the person on the task force who actually recommended the idea of the Retirement Commission, obviously it was contributed to from within the task force, but I wanted the Retirement Commissioner to be an officer of Parliament, where all politicians were able to contribute to and set the terms for the appointment of that crucial individual. The fact that it became effectively part of the MSD, I think, was a mistake. And we're living with the effects of that now. Some lessons. I have been disappointed with the results of the Retirement Commission's reviews. The main reason is, I think, because the government of the day sets the terms. The Retirement Commission obviously must have some sort of input into that setting those terms, but in reality, the government sets the rules. I'm also continue to be concerned about our lack of decent data. We have no idea whether home ownership rates are falling. We have no idea about whether New Zealanders are saving for retirement. We have no idea whether KiwiSaver works. We've spent more than $10 billion of taxpayers' money on KiwiSaver incentives, and we don't know whether it's working. We do not know whether households have improved their retirement income provision in the presence of KiwiSaver by comparison with what would have happened had KiwiSaver not been there. That, to me, is unacceptable. For me, the 2016 review was a low point. The Retirement Commission made 34 mostly evidence-free recommendations, and that prompted Michael Chamberlain and I to write our missing 2016 review report, which you'll be pleased to know we're currently updating with a view to informing the 2019 review. We do need to return to the roots. We do need evidence-led policy analysis. If you read the tax working group and said what they said about KiwiSaver tax breaks, further KiwiSaver tax breaks, that was a classic example of a Cullen-led, evidence-free recommendation. Spend $1 billion here because we think it's a good idea. That's all he said, effectively. I have to say that I think the 2019 terms of reference are tepid and non-threatening. And one of the recommendations we made in 2017, and we'll be repeating this year, is that we need to review the reviews. I don't think they're working. I don't think we've seen sufficient progress since the first review was issued in 1997. Thank you.